The air in the gas station convenience store was thick with the scent of stale coffee and cheap air freshener, a cloying sweetness that did little to mask the rot underneath. For Isla, it was the smell of a 10-minute reprieve, a temporary parole from the gilded cage where she lived. She moved with a practiced slowness, her eyes scanning the rows of candy bars and salted nuts, her mind racing 1,000 miles an hour. Her keeper, a hulking man named Dmitri whose silence was more menacing than any threat, stood by the door, arms crossed over a chest as broad as a tombstone. He was watching, always watching, but his gaze was directed outside, toward the gleaming black Escalade parked by the pumps, and toward the man who owned it, the man who owned her. Victor Sterling sat in the back, visible through the tinted glass, a king on a leather throne, speaking into his phone with the casual cruelty of a god swatting at flies. Isla's instructions had been simple. Buy a specific brand of imported water and a pack of mints. Do not talk to anyone. Do not look at anyone. Do not take longer than 3 minutes. But then she saw them, through the smudged glass of the storefront. A rumble grew into a roar, a squadron of chrome and steel pulling into the station's far side. Hell's Angels. Their cuts were unmistakable, leather vests adorned with the winged death's head, a symbol of terrifying freedom she could only dream of. They moved with a lazy, predatory grace, dismounting their Harleys as if they owned the very asphalt they stood on. Hope, a thing she'd thought long dead and buried, flickered like a dying ember in her chest. It was a stupid, insane idea, a spark that could either light a path out or burn her to the ground. Victor hated bikers. He saw them as gutter trash, uncivilized animals beneath his notice, which meant Dmitri wasn't paying them any real attention. This was her chance. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of her life. She grabbed the water, the mints, and, on a wild impulse, a chocolate bar she knew he despised. She needed a reason for a delay, a flaw in her perfect obedience. At the counter, she fumbled with the cash Victor had given her, her hand trembling so violently she dropped a few coins. The cashier, a pimply teenager, sighed with theatrical boredom. "Keep the change," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. She turned, her eyes locking on the bikers outside. Their leader, a man with a severe face, a jaw that looked like it was carved from granite, and eyes that missed nothing, was directing his men to the pumps. He wore his authority as comfortably as his leather. Now or never. She walked toward the door, her steps measured, her breath held tight in her lungs. Dmitri grunted, shifting his weight, ready to escort her back to the car. As she passed him, she tripped, the bottle of water and the mints flying from her grasp. The plastic bottle skittered across the grimy concrete, rolling to a stop near the biker leader's steel-toed boot. "Perfect. Clumsy," Dmitri snarled, grabbing her arm. His grip was iron, bruising, but it was the opening she needed. She wrenched away from him, stumbling forward, her body screaming with a cocktail of terror and adrenaline. She knelt to pick up the bottle, her back to Dmitri, her face shielded from the Escalade. The biker leader had turned, his expression a mask of indifference, but his eyes, a startlingly clear shade of gray, were fixed on her. He saw the way she moved, the flinch of pain, the subtle tremor in her hands. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing in the space of a heartbeat. She snatched the bottle, her fingers brushing against the toe of his boot. As she rose, she moved closer to him, her body a shield. She looked up directly into those stormy eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, she let the mask of compliance fall away. Her face, a canvas of controlled fear, crumpled into raw, unadulterated desperation. She grabbed the sleeve of his leather jacket, her grip surprisingly strong. Her voice was a bare whisper, lost to the wind and the hum of the gas pumps for anyone but him. "Please," she breathed, the word tearing from her soul. He did this last night. With her free hand, she pushed back the long sleeve of her cashmere sweater, revealing the constellation of violence on her forearm. A deep, ugly bruise, the size of a man's fist, bloomed in shades of purple and black against her pale skin, the imprint of Victor's signet ring still faintly visible in the damaged tissue. The biker's eyes narrowed, the gray hardening to slate. The air around him went cold, the lazy indifference evaporating like mist in a harsh sun. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. In that single, frozen moment, a silent contract was forged. He saw not just a bruise, but a story he knew all too well. A shadow of an old, raw memory flickered in his gaze, a pain that mirrored her own. Isla. Victor's voice cracked through the air like a whip. Dmitri was already moving, his massive hand clamping down on her shoulder, yanking her back. The contact was broken. She was pulled away, a doll in the hands of a monster, her heart sinking with the certainty that her gamble had failed. She'd shown her hand, and now the devil would collect his due. As Dmitri shoved her toward the escalade, she risked one last look back. The biker leader, Jax, hadn't moved. He stood like a statue of vengeance, his gaze locked on the back of Victor's head through the tinted glass. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a promise of hope. It was a promise of reckoning. Back in the car, the door slammed shut, sealing her in with the scent of expensive leather and simmering rage. Victor didn't look at her. He simply spoke to Dmitri. Double her dose tonight, and lock the terrace doors. She's feeling adventurous. The words were a death sentence. But as the escalade pulled away, leaving the Hell's Angels in a cloud of exhaust, Isla clutched the tiny, almost invisible nod to her chest. It was the first real thing she had held in years. A promise. And as she knew with chilling certainty what awaited her at home, she also knew that out there, in the world of chrome and leather and thunder, a storm was gathering, and it was gathering for her. The silence in the car was absolute, a vacuum where fear bred and multiplied. Victor continued his phone call, his voice a low, pleasant murmur that was more terrifying than any shout. He was closing a deal, destroying a competitor, smiling as he did it. He was a predator who enjoyed the hunt and the kill in equal measure. Isla stared out the window, the suburban landscape blurring into a smear of green and gray. Each manicured lawn, each perfect picket fence, was a mockery of the chaos that defined her existence. The bruise on her arm throbbed, a physical reminder of her failed defiance the night before. She had asked him a question, a simple, stupid question about whether she could call her mother, whose birthday it was. The request had shattered his calm, his mask of sophisticated control cracking to reveal the beast beneath. The beating had been methodical, precise, designed not to break bones, but to break her spirit. It was the signet ring that always left the worst marks, a small, golden lion's head that imprinted itself on her skin like a brand of ownership. "Are you listening to me, darling?" Victor's voice was silk, but the edge was pure steel. She turned from the window, schooling her features into a mask of placid attention. "Yes, Victor, good. Mr. Chun has agreed to our terms. We will be celebrating tonight. You will wear the red dress, the one with the low back, and you will smile. You will be the perfect hostess, the envy of everyone there. Do you understand?" "Yes, Victor," she repeated, the words tasting like ash. The red dress. It was beautiful, a slash of crimson silk that left most of her back bare, a canvas to display the faint, fading scars from previous lessons. It was his favorite, a trophy, as they pulled through the wrought iron gates of his estate. A sprawling mansion that felt more like a mausoleum. She saw Dmitri speaking into his wrist, relaying Victor's new orders. More guards. Locked doors. No more adventures. Her gamble at the gas station felt impossibly foolish now. A child's plea to a phantom. What could a biker do against a man like Victor Sterling? A man who had judges in his pocket, police chiefs on his payroll, and an army of private security that operated outside the law. But then she remembered the look in the biker's eyes. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. It was a cold, hard fury that seemed to emanate from a place of deep personal pain. She had shown him her wound, and he had shown her his. The escalade stopped, and the door was open for her. She stepped out into the manicured perfection of her prison, the scent of roses and despair hanging in the air. Tonight would be hell. But for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to believe that dawn might eventually come. She had lit the spark. Now all she could do was pray that someone, somewhere, was fanning it into a flame. The rumble of the Escalade faded into the distance, but Jax didn't move. The image of the woman's face, the desperation in her eyes, the brutal purple mark on her arm, it was all seared into his mind's eye. He felt the ghost of a similar grip on his own arm from years ago, a smaller, colder hand belonging to his sister, Sarah. The memory was a shard of glass in his gut, one he could never quite dislodge. He had failed her. He wouldn't fail this stranger. Grizz, his sergeant-at-arms, a mountain of a man with a beard that looked like it had its own ecosystem, stepped up beside him. His usual jovial expression was gone, replaced by a grim tightness around his eyes. "Saw that prez," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "The ring mark. Bastard likes to leave his signature." Jax finally turned, his gaze sweeping over his men. They were watching him, waiting. They had all seen the exchange, the silent plea, the violent retrieval. They were the Hell's Angels, outlaws, men the world feared. But they had a code, an ironclad set of rules forged in blood and loyalty, and at the very top of that list was a single, unspoken law. They did not abide men who hurt women. It was a line that, once crossed, invited a particular kind of hell. "She's with Sterling," Jax said, the name leaving a foul taste in his mouth. Victor Sterling, a so-called legitimate businessman who had his fingers in every dirty pie in the city. Narcotics, extortion, human trafficking. He moved in circles of power and wealth, insulated by lawyers and corrupt officials, a snake in a tailored suit. "Figures," Grizz spat on the ground. "High-class trash. What's the play, Jax?" The play. His mind was already working, clicking through logistics, risks, and consequences. Attacking a man like Sterling wasn't like cracking skulls in a bar fight. It was kicking a hornet's nest the size of a city block. It meant war. But looking at the fading oil slick where the Escalade had been, he knew it didn't matter. They had been chosen. That woman, with her desperate courage, had chosen them. "We're not going to play," Jax said, his voice cutting through the noise of the station. "We're going to burn his whole damn world to the ground." He swung his leg over his bike, the leather of the seat groaning under his weight. He fired up the engine, and the Harley roared to life, a guttural snarl of defiance. One by one, the other bikes followed suit, a chorus of thunder that shook the windows of the convenience store. "Grizz, you and Ghost get eyes on his house. I want to know every car, every guard, every time that son of a bitch breathes. Don't engage. Just watch." "Cypher," he called out to a wiry biker with a laptop bag strapped to his sissy bar. "I want everything you can find on Sterling. Bank accounts, shell corporations, hidden properties. Dig deep. Find his weaknesses." Cypher nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. "I'll find where he buried the bodies. The rest of you, back to the clubhouse," Jax commanded, his voice easily carrying over the idling engines. "We've got work to do." He pulled his sunglasses down, but they couldn't hide the glacial fury in his eyes. As he led the procession of bikes back onto the highway, the wind whipping at his cut, he let the memory of his sister surface. He remembered the hospital, the smell of antiseptic, the way she wouldn't meet his eyes. The man who had done it to her had been powerful too. Untouchable. Jax had been young then, just a prospect, full of rage, but lacking the power to bring the thunder. The club had handled it, of course, in their own way. But the guilt of not being the one to do it, of not being strong enough to protect her himself, had never left him. It had fueled his rise to president. It had sharpened his instincts. It had turned him into the man he was today. A man who recognized the look of a trapped soul because he'd seen it in his own family. A man who understood that sometimes the only angel a person can hope for is the one with a death's head on his back. The clubhouse was their sanctuary, a nondescript warehouse on the industrial outskirts of the city. Inside, it was a fortress of brotherhood. The smell of stale beer, old leather, and gun oil hung in the air. The long wooden bar was scarred with the history of 100 brawls and 1,000 celebrations. On the wall behind the bar, hung the charter, their flag, and a framed photo of fallen brothers. It was a sacred space. Jack stood before them, a map of Sterling's estate projected onto the wall from Cypher's laptop. The men were gathered, their faces grim, the usual boisterous energy replaced by a coiled, silent intensity. Sterling's compound is on the old ridge, Jax began, pointing to the screen. Private road, 2 miles long. Gates here, here, and here. According to Cypher's initial sweep, he's got a private security team. Ex-military, mostly Mossad and Spetsnaz washouts. The kind of guys who don't ask questions as long as the check clears. Grizz, who had just returned from his initial recon with Ghost, spoke up. They're disciplined. Roving patrols, thermal scopes, the works. The perimeter is a death trap. Fences are electrified, pressure plates in the woods. This ain't some rich prick with a few rent-a-cops. This is a fortress. He's having a party tonight, Cypher added, tapping on his keyboard. Celebrating some dirty deal. Full staff, guests arriving. That's our window. Chaos is cover. Jax nodded, his mind sifting through the variables. A frontal assault was suicide. They needed a more elegant solution. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. His gaze drifted to the picture of his sister on his private locker, a small, faded photo he kept tucked away. Her smile was bright, untainted by the darkness that would later consume her. This time will be different, he vowed silently. This time, I'm strong enough. This isn't just about getting her out, Jack said, his voice dropping, drawing them all in. Any fool can kick in a door. This is about sending a message. Men like Sterling, they think they're untouchable. They think their money and their high walls can protect them from the consequences of their actions. We're going to teach him that some walls aren't high enough. We're going to strip him of everything. His power, his reputation, his freedom. And we're going to do it our way. A low murmur of agreement rumbled through the room. This was what they did. They were the balance, the check on a system that so often failed to protect the innocent. They were the monsters who hunted other monsters. Ghost, Jack said, turning to a lean, quiet biker who could move through shadows like he was one of them. You're our eyes. I want you inside that perimeter. Find a blind spot. Find a weakness in their surveillance rotation. Grizz, you're with me on the extraction team. We go in quiet. No thunder. Not until we have her. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each of his men. He put his hands on that woman. He branded her. In our town, in our world, there is no greater sin. Tonight, Victor Sterling learns what happens when he invites the devil to his door. The men rose to their feet, a silent, unified wall of leather and resolve. There were no cheers, no shouts, just a grim, collective understanding. An oath had been taken at that gas station, and the Hell's Angels always paid their debts. The red dress was a second skin of silk and shame. Isla stood before the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her cavernous dressing room, a prisoner inspecting the finery of her cell. The fabric clung to her, the vibrant crimson a stark contrast to the pallor of her skin and the deep, violent purple of the bruise on her arm, which she had painstakingly concealed with a thick layer of makeup. The low-cut back of the dress exposed the delicate tracery of faded scars, a roadmap of Victor's displeasure over the years. He called it her tapestry of loyalty. She called it her cage made of flesh. Downstairs, the party was in full swing. The low thrum of music and the cacophony of feigned laughter drifted up, a soundtrack to her misery. She could picture the scene. Men like Victor, sleek and predatory in their expensive suits, their wives dripping in jewels and silent understanding. They were all part of the same grotesque theater, playing their roles, ignoring the rot beneath the polished veneer. A flashback, sharp and unwelcome, ambushed her. A different party, 6 months ago. She had been speaking with a guest, the wife of a city councilman, who had looked at her with a flicker of genuine sympathy. "Are you all right, dear?" the woman had asked, her voice a soft whisper. "You seem tense." Isla had almost broken. The words were on the tip of her tongue, a desperate plea for help. But then she saw Victor across the room, his eyes fixed on her, a small, cold smile on his lips. He raised a champagne flute in a mock toast, a silent, deadly warning. Later that night, he had dragged her into his study. You were tense, he'd mimicked, his voice a venomous parody of the woman's concern. You made Mrs. Albright uncomfortable. You embarrassed me. The punishment that followed had been swift and brutal, leaving her with 2 cracked ribs and the chilling understanding that there was no one in their gilded world who would dare to help her. No one but her. That realization had been the seed of her escape plan, a tiny, defiant weed growing in the barren soil of her life. She had started to observe, to learn. She'd memorized security patrol routes, noted the brief dead zone and camera coverage near the service entrance, and, in a stroke of luck, found a tiny, forgotten burner phone in the pocket of a coat left behind by a guest, its battery still holding a meager charge. It was her secret, her one tangible piece of hope. A sharp knock on the door jolted her back to the present. "He is waiting for you." Dimitri's voice boomed from the other side. She took one last look in the mirror, fixing the mask of serene elegance onto her face. She was an actress about to step onto the stage for the performance of her life. She descended the grand, curving staircase, each step a carefully choreographed movement. All eyes turned to her. She was Victor's most prized possession, and he displayed her as such. He stood at the bottom of the stairs, a wolf in a tuxedo, his smile wide and possessive. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a gesture that looked tender to the outside world, but felt like the scrape of a key on a lock. "Magnificent, my love," he purred for the benefit of his audience. "The perfect jewel in my perfect home." He led her into the throng, his hand a proprietary brand on the small of her bare back. She smiled, she laughed, she played her part. But beneath the surface, her mind was a whirlwind of calculations. The dead zone by the service entrance. The burner phone hidden in a hollowed-out book in the library. The biker with the slate-gray eyes. Was he out there? Was her insane gamble going to pay off? Or had she only succeeded in tightening her own chains? An hour into the party, she saw her chance. Victor was deep in conversation with a Japanese investor, his back to her. She murmured an excuse about needing some air and slipped away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She moved through the house with practiced stealth, her silk dress whispering against the marble floors. The library was dark and silent, a stark contrast to the noise of the party. Her hands trembled as she retrieved the book from the shelf. Inside, the small, cheap phone felt like a holy relic. She crept toward the service corridor, her ears straining for the sound of guards. The patrol passed, their footsteps receding down the hall. She had a window, maybe 2 minutes, max. She slipped into the pantry, the air thick with the smell of spices and dry goods. The single window was small, high up and barred, but faced the woods at the edge of the property. She powered on the phone, praying it would find signal. 1 bar. It would have to be enough. But who could she call? The police were useless. Victor owned them. Her family was 1,000 miles away, and calling them would only put them in danger. Then she remembered the name on the biker's cut. Hell's Angels. It was a long shot, a desperate prayer hurled into the void. She typed Hell's Angels City Chapter into the phone's crude browser. A number for their clubhouse appeared. Her finger hovered over the screen. This was it, the point of no return. Taking a deep, ragged breath, she pressed call. At the edge of the Sterling estate, hidden in a thicket of pine and shadow, Ghost lay perfectly still. He was a part of the forest, a predator in his natural habitat. Through the high-powered lens of his binoculars, the house was a blaze of light, a beacon of corrupt wealth. He had been watching for hours, mapping the patrols, timing the camera's sweeps, learning the rhythm of the fortress. He'd found it just as Jax knew he would. A blind spot, a 30-second gap in the camera rotation covering a small section of the western wall, obscured by a large, overgrown oak tree. It was a tiny flaw in an otherwise perfect system, enough for a ghost to slip through. His radio crackled to life, a soft hiss in his ear. Status. It was Jax's voice, calm and steady. Found a way in, Ghost whispered back. West wall by the big oak. 30-second window, every 7 minutes. It's tight, but it's their good work, Jax replied. Cypher's picked up something. A cell signal just popped up inside the house. A burner. It's not registered to Sterling or his staff. Ghost felt a surge of adrenaline. It had to be her. Is she calling out? She is, Jax confirmed, a hard edge to his voice. She called us. The line went silent for a moment, the weight of that simple statement hanging in the air. She hadn't given up. She was fighting. The plan is a go, Jack said, his voice now cold as the grave. The diversion team hits in 10. Ghost, get ready to move. We're coming in, Ghost exhaled slowly, the cool night air filling his lungs. He watched the lights of the party, the oblivious figures moving behind the glass, and felt a familiar, cold rage settle over him. They were dancing on her grave, and they didn't even know it. He checked his gear, the silenced pistol, the climbing harness, the night vision goggles. He was ready. The storm was about to break, and he was proud to be one of its first drops of rain. Back in the clubhouse, Jax hung up the phone. The call had been short, a single, terrified whisper before the line went dead. He's coming. That was all she'd managed to say. It was enough. She made contact, Jax announced to the assembled team. The air in the room crackled with a sudden, palpable energy. She's in the pantry, service corridor. But he's onto her. Time's up. We move now. Grizz checked the magazine on his shotgun, the shuck-shuck of him chambering around the only sound in the room. Let's go to work. They moved with the quiet efficiency of a wolf pack on the hunt. The plan they had spent hours meticulously crafting was now in motion, a complex piece of machinery with dozens of moving parts. This wasn't just about brute force. It was about surgical precision. Jax felt the old, familiar fire in his veins, the same fire that had driven him since he was a teenager full of helpless rage. His sister's face flashed in his mind again, not as she was in the hospital, but as a child, laughing as he pushed her on a swing. He was her protector then, and he was this woman's protector now. It was the same fight, the same demon, just wearing a different face. He pulled on his cut, the leather settling on his shoulders like a familiar weight. The death's head on his back wasn't just a symbol of fear. It was a promise. A promise to those who had no one else to turn to. A promise that when you stare into the abyss, sometimes the abyss sends its own monsters to fight for you. No one gets left behind, he said, the club's creed a solemn vow. No one, they echoed back in a low chorus. The engines roared to life, a symphony of controlled power. They rode out into the night, not as a chaotic swarm, but as a disciplined unit, a wave of dark chrome and righteous fury rolling toward the false light on the hill. They were the Hell's Angels, and they were coming to collect a debt. Victor Sterling was about to learn that his walls weren't nearly high enough to keep out the hell he had so foolishly invited. The diversion was a masterpiece of mayhem. 2 miles from Sterling's estate, on the main road leading into the exclusive neighborhood, a stolen big rig, driven by a prospect eager to earn his patch, suddenly lost control. It jackknifed with a screech of tortured metal, completely blocking both lanes and taking out a power transformer in a shower of brilliant blue sparks. The resulting blackout plunged the surrounding area into darkness, affecting everything except Sterling's mansion, which immediately switched to its powerful private generators. The local police and emergency services would be tied up for hours. Simultaneously, Cypher, working from a mobile command van parked a half-mile away, launched a series of sophisticated cyber attacks. He flooded Sterling's security company with thousands of false alarms from their other clients across the city, creating a storm of digital chaos. The security monitoring center was overwhelmed, their attention diverted, their resources stretched thin. It was the perfect smokescreen. Under the cover of this manufactured chaos and the moonless, stormy sky, Ghost moved. He scaled the perimeter fence during the 30-second blind spot, moving with a fluid, silent grace that belied his size. He was inside. He navigated the wooded grounds, his night vision goggles turning the darkness into a pale green landscape. He moved from shadow to shadow, a phantom in the manicured gardens, disabling pressure plates and silent alarms with practiced ease, clearing a path for the primary team. Back in the pantry, Isla's blood ran cold. She had heard the click of the library door opening just as she ended the call. She'd barely had time to shove the burner phone deep into a sack of flour before Dmitri filled the doorway, his face a thundercloud of suspicion. "What are you doing in here?" he growled, his eyes sweeping the small room. I felt faint," she stammered, pressing a hand to her forehead. "I needed some water. The party was so stuffy. It was a weak lie, and they both knew it." Dmitri took a step inside, his bulk crowding the small space. His eyes fell on the faint dusting of white flour on her red dress. He reached out, his thick fingers brushing the powder, his gaze locking with hers. He knew. He didn't know how, but he knew she had done something. He grabbed her arm, his fingers digging into the fresh bruise, and a gasp of pain escaped her lips. "Mr. Sterling will want to talk to you," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He dragged her out of the pantry and through the service corridors, away from the party, toward the one place in the house she feared more than any other, Victor's soundproof study. This was it. Her desperate gamble had failed. The bikers weren't coming. It had all been a foolish fantasy. As Dmitri shoved her through the heavy oak doors of the study, she saw Victor standing by the fireplace, a glass of scotch in his hand. The party music was a faint, muffled beat through the thick walls. He turned, and the charming smile he wore for his guests was gone, replaced by an expression of pure, reptilian coldness. "My dear Isla," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "Dmitri tells me you are feeling adventurous again. Tell me, what secrets are you hiding in the pantry?" He set his glass down and walked toward her, his movements slow, deliberate, like a predator circling its cornered prey. The fear was a physical thing, a cold weight in her stomach, but beneath it, a tiny ember of defiance still glowed. She had made the call. She had lit the fuse. Whatever happened next, she had not gone quietly into the night. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. "I have no secrets." Victor, his lips twisted into a cruel smirk. "Oh, I think you do. And we have all night to find them." The storm broke outside, a sudden clap of thunder rattling the windows, mirroring the tempest about to be unleashed within the house. Jax, Grizz, and two other bikers, Reaper and Doc, slipped through the breach Ghost had created. They were shadows moving against shadows, armed with silenced weapons and the weight of their purpose. They followed Ghost's hand signals, bypassing the blinded cameras and deactivated sensors, their boots making no sound on the damp earth. They reached the house, a hulking monument to one man's ego, and found the service entrance. Ghost made quick work of the lock, and they were inside. The air was cool, sterile. They were in a ghost's world now, the muffled sounds of the party a distant, alien thing. Jax felt the familiar surge, the heightened senses, the world narrowing down to the mission. Find her. Get her out. They moved through the service corridors, following the intelligence from the blueprints they'd acquired from the disgruntled ex-guard. The house was a labyrinth of wealth and paranoia. They passed the kitchen, where staff moved in a flurry of activity, oblivious to the specters in the hallway. They were close. Jax could feel it. He heard a sound, a muffled thud, from behind a heavy door down the hall. He motioned for the team to halt. He pressed his ear to the wood. He could hear voices, a man's, low and menacing, and then a cry of pain, quickly stifled. It was her. Jax's hand tightened on the grip of his pistol. The plan had been to go in quiet, extract her without a confrontation, if possible. But that cry changed the equation. The time for stealth was over. The time for thunder had arrived. He looked at Grizz, who simply nodded, his eyes hard. He looked at Reaper and Doc, who had their weapons ready. A silent understanding passed between them all. Jax took a deep breath, kicked the door, and all hell broke loose. The heavy oak door splintered off its hinges, crashing into the room with the force of a battering ram. For a split second, the scene was a frozen tableau. Victor, his hand raised to strike Isla again. Isla, crumpled on the floor, her face bleeding from a fresh cut on her cheek. Dmitri, turning from his post by the door, his face a mask of shock. Then, chaos erupted. Jax was through the doorway before the door even hit the floor, his target singular. Victor. He moved with a speed that was terrifying in a man his size, closing the distance in 2 long strides. Victor, recovering his composure, sneered. "Who the hell do you think you are?" He reached inside his jacket, but he was too slow. Jax's fist connected with Victor's jaw, a brutal, crunching impact that sent the smaller man flying backward over his expensive desk. Papers and glass scattered as he crashed to the floor. Simultaneously, Grizz and Reaper engaged Dimitri. The giant guard was a formidable opponent, roaring as he charged, but he was facing 2 enraged Hell's Angels. Grizz met his charge head-on, their collision shaking the room. While Reaper flanked him, his movements quick and precise, a flurry of targeted strikes to Dimitri's joints. Doc, the team's medic, immediately went to Isla, shielding her with his body. "We're here to get you out," he said, his voice calm and reassuring amidst the violence. "Can you stand?" Isla, stunned and bleeding, could only stare at the leather-clad giants who had materialized from her wildest hopes. She looked at Jax, who now stood over the groaning form of Victor Sterling, the biker from the gas station. He had come. He had actually come. The fight with Dimitri was short and savage. The guard was strong, but Grizz was a force of nature, and Reaper was a whirlwind of control violence. A final, sickening crack echoed through the room as Grizz brought Dimitri down, unconscious and broken. But the main event was just beginning. Victor staggered to his feet, pulling a small, silver pistol from his ankle holster. "You'll pay for this, you filth!" he shrieked, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He raised the gun, aiming it squarely at Jax. Jax didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his own weapon. He just looked at Victor with an expression of utter contempt. "A gun," Jax said, his voice a low growl. "That's a coward's tool. You're not going to shoot me, Sterling, because you're weak. You only know how to hurt people who can't fight back." Enraged, Victor fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, the bullet whizzing past Jax's head to shatter a priceless vase on the mantelpiece. Before he could fire again, Jax was on him. He grabbed Victor's wrist, squeezing until the bones ground together, forcing him to drop the pistol. He spun Victor around, slamming him against the wall, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs. "This," Jax snarled, his face inches from Victor's, "is for her." He didn't use a weapon. He used his fists. It was brutal, primal. Each blow was a release of years of pent-up rage. For his sister, for this woman, for every victim who had ever suffered at the hands of a monster like Victor. He systematically dismantled him, breaking his arrogance, his pride, and several of his bones. When it was over, Victor Sterling was a whimpering, bloody heap on his own $1,000 rug, his tailored suit in tatters, his reign of terror at an end. Jack stood over him, breathing heavily, the adrenaline slowly beginning to recede. He turned to Isla, who was now on her feet, leaning on Doc for support. Her eyes, wide with shock and a dawning, fragile hope, met his. The slate gray of his gaze softened, just for a moment. "It's over," he said, his voice rough but gentle. "You're safe now." Sirens wailed in the distance, but they were the wrong kind of sirens, heading toward the diversion. The sounds of the party had died down, replaced by panicked shouts as the staff and guests realized something was terribly wrong. "We gotta go," Grizz said, pulling a zip tie tight around Dimitri's wrists. Now Jax nodded. He walked over to Victor's desk and swept a pile of documents into a satchel. "Insurance," he grunted. Evidence of Victor's criminal enterprises that Cypher would put to good use. He then walked to Isla, shrugging off his own leather cut. He draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of gasoline and freedom. The death's head on the back felt like a shield. "Let's get you home," he said, as they guided her out of the study and back into the shadows of the house. Isla looked back one last time at the broken man on the floor. The monster who had haunted her every waking moment and terrorized her dreams was just that, a broken man. The fear was still there, a ghost that would take time to exorcise, but for the first time in years, it was overshadowed by something else. Gratitude, and a fierce, burning hope for the dawn that was finally breaking. The ride back to the clubhouse was a blur of roaring engines and whipping wind. Tucked securely between Jack's and the backrest of his bike, with a heavy leather cut wrapped around her, Isla felt a strange sense of peace. For years, every ride in a vehicle had been a journey from one part of her prison to another. This ride was different. This was a flight to freedom. The world outside the bubble of the motorcycle was a smear of neon and shadow, but for the first time, it looked like a world of possibilities, not threats. The rumble of the Harley beneath her was a powerful, steady heartbeat, a rhythm of life and strength that vibrated through her entire body, chasing away the cold dread that had been her constant companion. They arrived at the warehouse, and a large metal door rolled up to reveal the heart of the Hell's Angels world. The interior was dimly lit, filled with a gleam of chrome, the scent of leather, and the low murmur of voices. As Jax led her inside, a hush fell over the room. Every biker turned to look at her, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and grim respect. She tensed, the old instinct to be invisible kicking in. But there was no menace in their stares, only a quiet acknowledgement. A woman with silver hair and kind, intelligent eyes emerged from a back room. She wore a patched vest over a simple t-shirt, and she moved with an air of gentle authority. "This is Martha," Jack said, his voice softer than Isla had heard it. "She's Doc's old lady. She'll take care of you." Martha smiled, a warm, genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Come on, sweetie," she said, taking Isla's hand. Her touch was firm and reassuring. "Let's get you cleaned up." She led Isla to a small, clean apartment at the back of the clubhouse. It was simple, furnished with a comfortable-looking bed, a small kitchenette, and a clean bathroom. It was more of a home than the mansion had ever been. Martha helped her clean the cut on her cheek and tend her bruises, her movements efficient and gentle. She didn't ask questions or offer empty platitudes. She simply provided a quiet, comforting presence that Isla desperately needed. "You're safe here," Martha said as she handed Isla a clean t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants. "No one can touch you here. You rest. We'll talk when you're ready." Left alone, Isla sank onto the bed, the soft cotton of the t-shirt a balm against her bruised skin. The silence of the room was a gift. There was no underlying threat, no fear of a door suddenly bursting open. She was exhausted, her body and soul aching with the trauma of the night and the years that had preceded it. But as she lay down, pulling a thick blanket over herself, she realized the ever-present knot of fear in her stomach had begun to loosen its grip. Sleep did not come easily. It was haunted by fragmented nightmares, the sneer on Victor's face, the glint of his ring. But this time, the nightmares were different. They were interrupted by the roar of a Harley engine, the image of a leather-clad angel kicking down a door. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the small window. For a moment, panic seized her. Sunlight meant Victor would be awake. But then she remembered. Victor was gone. The monster was caged. She sat up, the events of the previous night rushing back, feeling less like a dream and more like a seismic shift in the foundation of her world. The smell of coffee and frying bacon wafted in from the main clubhouse. Hesitantly, she got up and opened the door. The clubhouse was a different place in the daylight. A few bikers were scattered around, drinking coffee, cleaning their bikes, their easy camaraderie filling the space. Grizz was at the bar, arguing with another member about the merits of a particular brand of motor oil. He saw her and gave her a gruff nod, a gesture of welcome that made her feel surprisingly at ease. Jax was sitting at a large table, poring over the documents he had taken from Victor's study. He looked up as she approached, his gray eyes assessing her. "Morning," he said. "Coffee's fresh." She poured herself a cup, her hand still trembling slightly. What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Now," Jack said, leaning back in his chair. "We finish it." He explained that the documents were a gold mine. They detailed Victor's entire criminal network, money laundering schemes, offshore accounts, records of bribery and extortion. Cypher was already at work, anonymously feeding the information to a select few federal agents and investigative journalists, the ones Victor couldn't buy. He won't be getting out of this, Jax stated, not as a prediction, but as a fact. His empire is going to crumble, and he'll be buried in the rubble. Even if he somehow makes bail, he'll have bigger problems. The people he works for don't take kindly to this kind of exposure. He paused, his gaze softening again. But that's our concern. Your only concern is healing. You can stay here as long as you need. No one will ask anything of you. The days that followed were a slow, painful, but steady process of recovery. Isla spent most of her time in the small apartment, reading, sleeping, and slowly reacquainting herself with the feeling of safety. Martha was a constant, gentle presence, bringing her food, talking with her when she wanted to talk, and sitting in comfortable silence when she didn't. The bikers gave her space, but she was always aware of their protective presence. They were loud and rough, but there was an undeniable kindness to them. They treated her not as a fragile victim, but as a survivor who had earned their respect. She would watch them work on their bikes, their hands, which could be so destructive, moving with incredible precision and care. She began to see them not as the terrifying outlaws the world perceived them to be, but as a family. A dysfunctional, dangerous, and fiercely loyal family. One evening, she found Jax alone, cleaning his pistol at the bar. She sat down a few stools away from him. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why did you help me?" Jax stopped what he was doing, his hands going still. He stared at the polished steel of the gun for a long moment before answering. "I had a sister," he said, his voice low and strained. "Sarah. She was bright, full of life. She got involved with a man like Sterling. Rich, powerful, charming. He broke her, bit by bit. By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late. I was just a prospect. I couldn't. I didn't have the power to stop him." He looked up, and for the first time, Isla saw the raw, unhealed wound he carried. The club took care of him, but it didn't fix her. The damage was done. She never got that light back in her eyes. I swore to myself that I would never stand by and let that happen to anyone else. Not on my watch. He looked at her, his expression one of profound, shared understanding. "When you grabbed my arm, I saw my sister's ghost in your eyes. I wasn't going to fail her again." The confession hung in the air between them, a bridge of shared pain and resilience. In that moment, Isla understood the true meaning of the Hell's Angels Code. It wasn't about lawlessness. It was about a different kind of law, a higher justice for those the system had failed. "Thank you, Jax," she whispered, the words carrying the weight of her entire reclaimed life. "You didn't just save me. You gave me back my hope." He simply nodded. The conversation finished. The debt was paid. The ghost, for a moment, was at peace. Months passed. The seasons changed. Victor Sterling's world had indeed crumbled, just as Jax had promised. The evidence provided by the club had sparked a massive federal investigation, leading to dozens of arrests and the complete collapse of his criminal enterprise. Victor himself, denied bail and facing a mountain of charges, was found dead in his cell, a victim of what the authorities called a prison altercation. His former associates, it seemed, did not appreciate loose ends. The news of his death did not bring Isla joy, but it brought a profound sense of closure. The final chain had been broken. She was truly free. She had moved out of the clubhouse and into a small apartment of her own in a quiet, anonymous part of the city. She had a part-time job at a local library, the silence and the stories a soothing balm for her soul. She was also volunteering at a women's shelter, one that the club now discreetly funded through an anonymous benefactor. She used her experiences not as a source of shame, but as a source of strength, helping other women find the courage to light their own fuses. She had changed. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, resilient strength. Her hair was cut shorter, her clothes were simpler, and she walked with a confidence she never thought she would possess. She still had scars, both visible and invisible, but they no longer defined her. They were just part of her story, a testament to the battle she had fought and won. One crisp autumn afternoon, she stood outside the library, watching the leaves fall, when she heard the familiar rumble. A line of Harleys, led by Jax, pulled up to the curb. They were on their way out of town for a run. Jax caught her eye and pulled his bike over. He didn't get off, just idled there, the engine a low, powerful growl. He looked at her, really looked at her, and a slow, rare smile touched his lips. It wasn't a smile of pity or even protection. It was a smile of respect. Of equals. "You good, Isla?" he asked, his voice carrying easily over the engine. "I'm good, Jax," she replied, her own smile genuine and bright. "I'm more than good," he nodded once, satisfied. He looked back at his men, rev his engine, and with a final nod to her, he led the pack down the road, their thunder fading into the distance. Isla watched them go, a profound sense of gratitude washing over her. They were outlaws, monsters, angels of death. But they had been her saviors. They had shattered the silence and given her back her voice. She turned and walked back into the library, back to her new life, a free woman standing tall under a wide-open sky. The world is full of monsters hiding in plain sight, but it's also full of unexpected heroes. Sometimes they wear suits and badges, and sometimes they wear leather and ride on a wave of thunder. If this story of courage and unlikely salvation moved you, share it to honor the quiet strength of survivors everywhere. Comment below with your thoughts on these outlaw heroes, and let's continue to support those who fight to shatter the silence of abuse.